Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 15th of January 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, deep behind the technical desk, is Mike Robinson. And we're going to be joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Well, the weather across the country, it's good in most places, apart from Plymouth. We've had the most incredibly heavy shower just come through, probably sleet. There was some snow on Dartmoor earlier on this morning. But the weather reports are that essentially Perthshire is sunshine and snow, very pretty winter's day. We should all move to Scotland apparently. London is good, Hampshire's good, Rhyll's good. The Pembrokeshire Corgis are frolicking in the cold weather. Norfolk, did I mention Norfolk? Norfolk's also good. So it appears that most people are having winter now, apart from Plymouth, which is wet. Okay, that's it on the weather. I'd just like to say that we reported a couple of days ago, we were talking about the Church of England and abuse of youngsters at Kendal House. I had said that some boys were involved in, were survivors of that abuse or victims of that abuse at the time. And I've been corrected on that, and that the youngsters abused in the Church of England's facility were all girls. So I'd just like to make that clear, and also say to people, if you haven't read it, you may like to get hold of a copy of Pinned Down, which is the book about the experiences of Teresa Cooper. Well, Mike, money is, or the love of money is the root of all evil, which probably takes us to financial matters.
Yes, so I think it was the first day back, we were reporting on the Financial Conduct Authority and that it had decided to drop its plans to hold an inquiry into the culture, pay and behaviour of staff in banking. And at the time we were pointing out that there was some allegation of government sort of shenanigans going on, some pressure from the Treasury to get the Financial Conduct Authority to drop that inquiry. Well, it seems that the Financial Times today is reporting that the FCA has now launched an inquiry into the leak of documents to the Financial Times on this matter. So basically what happened was that Tracy McDermott, who's the acting chief executive of the Financial Conduct Authority, she's ordered this investigation into how the Financial Times received leaked documents, and therefore were able to reveal certain information about this close down of this inquiry. Basically on the 7th of January, however, she announced that she wouldn't be taking part in the process to replace the chief executive. So she's only the interim chief executive, so she's withdrawn from the race to find a replacement leader for that organisation. And then on Monday this week, the Financial Conduct Authority denied being pressurised by either the Treasury, the Bank of England, or the Prudential Regulation Authority in order to drop this inquiry into banking standards. And then on Tuesday, the Financial Times received the leaked document, or they had received the leaked document, and they published the information on Tuesday, basically saying that it was a Bank of England official who had overseen as the FT is describing it here, overseen the move by the city regulator to scrap a review into Britain's banks. So it looks like it was the Bank of England that placed the pressure on, and the Financial Conduct Authority pretty upset that this document was leaked to the Financial Times. But it seems like all is not well in the City of London regulatory environment, pressure building. Maybe they are feeling the pressure as a result of potential financial collapse that we're seeing at the moment, Brian.
Well, that's true, Mike. But of course, the other thing is it's showing us once again the power of the truth. The moment truth is around, everybody's running for cover and trying to batten down the hatches and threatening people who've got the truth. So if you've got the truth out there, keep pushing it out.
And then earlier this week, we were talking about the state of shipping worldwide as an indicator of what's going on in the economy. And of course, some people were saying that nothing was going on with regard to shipping, that there were no ships on the seas at all. Again, the Baltic Dry Index, which is the measure of how much it costs for container ships to, well, sorry, it's not for, it's for bulk ships to carry stuff around the world, mainly commodities of various kinds. This sort of gives a measure of how much people have to pay to ship their corn or whatever it is from one side of the world to another. So what we have here is the Baltic Dry Index falling below 400 points for the first time ever. What they're saying here is the spot price, for example, if we take the largest sort of bulk carrier that's going, which is called a capsize, that's 80,000, capable of carrying 80,000 tons of stuff. The spot price for one of those ships was basically falling as low as $2,000 per day. And Brian, I mean, it's pretty clear that it's impossible to run a ship of that size at $2,000 per day.
Well, I would be amazed if they could do that, Mike. One thing about ships is they just swallow money. These are huge ships, and everything about them is expensive. Everything. So something really strange is going on here.
Well, so some quotes here. Consultancy firm MSI said that the dry bulk industry is in a critical state. More gloom is forecast for the bulk carrier market over the short term. Concerns over the state of China's economy are key. And we'll just reiterate once again, of course, this isn't really about China's economy. This is about the fact that China's exports are collapsing as a result of our economies. So people saying this is a generational recession in this particular industry, they don't expect things to get any better until 2018 or 2019. I think even that's optimistic. I wonder, has David got any comment on that?
Well, nothing was fixed, of course. When we had the major drawback and the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, there are reasons that happened, and those reasons are still in place. Nothing's been fixed. Essentially, malinvestment's the problem. You have people like central banks, like the Bank of England, believing that they can steer the economy with interest rates and what have you. They're sending out false signals. Malinvestment's the result, and that has to be eliminated from the economy. That's what we call a recession. It's a corrective measure to correct previous mistakes. Now, governments now won't allow that to happen. So what's going to happen is the problems and the misallocations of capital and the dislocations within the economy are going to build and build and build. And when we have the next downturn, it will be all the larger and all the more damaging as a result.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Now, we mentioned to you before the program that we would like to show you something, which we're going to do live on air. We had a little bit of video film sent to us some time ago, and the person who sent it to us said that he just couldn't understand what he was looking at. This was to do with road bridges, and we thought you must be the man to have a look at it, and we'd like your comment. Indeed, we'd like the comment of anybody else who knows exactly what we're looking at and what it's all for. But we thought we'd try Northern Exposure first. So here we go, David, a little bit of a video clip coming up. I'll just say that what have we got here? We're looking under a section of road. This is one of the support pillars. And we've got a funny box with wires going into the concrete. You can see left and right that there's sort of grey concrete replaced. This is another site. And if you look, there's a sort of grid system. So down to the, I'll just wait. So we've got quite a bit of power there coming in through boxes. Here's the grid system. And there's been holes drilled in the wall, and then things have been put in, sensors have been put in these little holes, and then they're all linked back to these distribution boxes. So if I just jump onto the next image, in the holes in that grid system are apparently these things. And we've got a couple of coins of 50p and whatever that is, of 5, I think, for a scale. So they're about 2.5 inches long, apparently. Bit of wire sticking out, which is linked into the rest of that grid system. We just thought if they were a strain gauge or something like that, you'd only have 1 or 2 of them. You wouldn't be drilling lots of holes if you were worried whether the bridge was going to stand up. Can you tell us more?
Yes, I think that is what you're looking at there is called cathodic protection. This is a means of preventing corrosion in the reinforcement within the concrete. If you get, particularly if you get a bridge which is contaminated with de-icing salts, which are very aggressive, as you know from corrosion in a car, you'll get very rapid corrosion and concentrated corrosion in the embedded reinforcement in the bridge. Now, once the contaminating salts have reached the reinforcement, your choices in terms of how to make that bridge last longer are somewhat limited. One of the systems which you see there is an active cathodic protection system. And this basically makes corrosion is an exchange of electrons. It's basically an electrical circuit that's set up, and by providing the power in this way, the reinforcement is changed from being the anode, which corrodes, to being the cathode, which is providing electrons to the system. And corrosion of the reinforcement is stopped or enormously slowed, and the durability of the bridge is extended as a result. Very expensive, not something I can boast any great expertise in, because it is quite specialist. But yes, I think that's what you're looking at there, Brian.
David, it looks like it's got quite a lot of power to it, so there must be ongoing running costs as well.
Yes. I mean, there are several types. Some of these are passive systems where you simply build in lumps of zinc attached to the reinforcement to provide a sort of sacrificial anode by that method, and other systems are actually hooked into the mains, as the one that you illustrated there is. And in the latter case, yes, you do have a running cost.
Okay, well, David, brilliant. Thanks for explaining that to us. I think what we can say, though, if you've got a few cracks appearing in the Forth Road Bridge, we're suffering from a bit of degradation of the concrete supports of motorway bridges. But don't worry, we can sort that out with electricity. It's a brilliant system. Okay, well, Mike, Europe is getting pretty serious, and George Osborne wading in.
Yes, so George Osborne is in Germany at the moment as part of the so-called renegotiation for this EU referendum PSYOP that's going on at the moment. And he was giving an interview to the BBC Newsnight last night, in which he said he is a Eurosceptic. Now, I didn't get a chance before the start of the programme to extend the length of Osborne's nose there, but I thought it was probably appropriate if I had. The other things he said, let's see, what else did he say? He said that with regard to leaving the EU, that he rules nothing out, which, of course, Evan Davis didn't really give him any stressful questions to answer, but when he was sort of mildly pressed on this issue, this is pretty much as far as he was prepared to go. They're pretending that they're intending to leave the European Union, but what was absolutely clear is that this is the vote. There is no second vote. This is the critical decision of our lifetime, and he really was pretty forceful about that, because I think what he was talking about was his lifetime and David Cameron's lifetime, or at least their political lifetimes. So he said that the majority, apparently, of people in the UK want to stay in a reformed EU, and that's why this renegotiation matters, because it offers a chance of a new settlement. Very constitutional reformist language there, a new settlement between Britain and Europe, but not part of ever closer union where the Eurozone can't impose charges on us. Changes on us, sorry. So one of the things that came across was that clearly his City of London masters do not want Britain to be, or at least the City of London rather, to be under the spell of the Eurozone. But on the other hand, what is increasingly clear as time goes on is that whatever agreement is put on the table whenever they present it in February, we're only going to see half of the reality. So we might see one side of each page, but we're not going to see the other side. So we're going to have to keep offering an assessment of what might be included in the terms and conditions that we don't get to see.
And the other thing that's happening, Mike, is that Tony Blair's been dragged into the spotlight. He's giving us advice. He's saying that we've got to support the EU army. And as a gentleman pointed out to me this morning, that if they get the EU army in fast enough, then it doesn't really matter at all what the result of any form of referendum on Europe is, because the super state would have been built. But isn't it remarkable? A man who engineered an unlawful war, how many people died? Millions is probably the true figure for that. And yet this is the man now paraded around to give us advice. It's quite extraordinary. Well, if the Ministry of Defence is not telling the truth about integration with European armed forces, we shouldn't be surprised, because let's just remind ourselves that the Ministry of Defence at the moment does not want to tell the truth about who it was brought in the policy promoting Satanism. A little while ago, we showed this Freedom of Information exchange where a gentleman had actually asked for the supply of documents relating to the recent approval of Satanism or Luciferianism as a religion, and the approval of worship on board Royal Naval vessels. What did the Ministry of Defence do? Well, they basically said, well, there hadn't been any approval. It was all mistake. It couldn't possibly be right. It was the most appalling fob-off answer. Well, we're pleased to say that the member of the public has gone back to them and said, not good enough, I'm requesting an internal review of Ministry of Defence's handling of his Freedom of Information request. And of course, he's also pointed out that the Ministry of Defence were absolutely promoting Satanism. Here is the Daily Record saying that the sailor who admitted being a Satanist had been promoted to a job with the Ministry of Defence. So the promotion is in more than one sense. But in this article, I think it was the man's mother was saying, well, they accepted what he did and even offered him space on board to carry out satanic rituals. So basically clear that British Ministry of Defence is promoting Satanism. But when the public ask who were the people that decided this was such a great idea, of course the lies and the cover-up start. And that theme is continued. We mentioned Larium, the drug Larium yesterday, and we're just going to say it's remarkable, isn't it? We've got an MOD promoting Satanism and an MOD knowingly administering Larium in a manner which it has been causing harm to military personnel. Have we got the situation at the moment where there's a deliberate attempt to break down our armed forces? It seems to me the answer to that is yes. David, I'll just give you a quick comment before we'll hand over to you for your material from Northern Exposure.
Yes, the Satanism on board warships and Satanism in general, you actually wonder what's going on between these people's ears. You know, do they really know what they're dealing with? Do they really have any clue as to the damage and the threat that's posed by such beliefs and such practices? The administration of harmful drugs obviously has echoes back to the Gulf War and Gulf War syndrome, which is one of many diseases, including ME, which the people who are in charge of assessing the disease and helping the victims and being placed in that position by the government don't actually believe that the disease exists. They believe that it's all imagined. So this is the sort of guidance we're getting from on high, from our government.
Yes, something is wrong. You're now going to take us north of the border where we can also see something wrong, but the style of the problems seem to be the same. So we'll just start off. This was a letter concerning Robert Greene, but from the Right Honourable, I do hate that expression, Andy Burnham MP. We'll just call him a man called Andy. And this starts to lead us into the fact that Eilish Angelini was given a very important role, chairing deaths in custody. So this was the government announcement, but I'll just pop back to this letter. What's the significance of this one, David?
Well, it showed a little bit of movement from our wise overlords to actually look at this issue. This was in response to multiple letters, including this one was sent back to Robert Greene, but there's been many other people writing as well to Mr. Burnham regarding the appointment of Dame Eilish Angelini to look after deaths in custody investigations in England and Wales. Now, Many people feel that she's entirely not the right person to be doing that, and made this case very forcibly to the Home Secretary and also to the Shadow, Andy Burnham. Mr. Burnham said he would look into this. Now, looking into this meant sending a copy of this correspondence to Theresa May and saying, is everything okay? What it now appears has happened is Theresa May has come back and said, yes, everything's fine, there's nothing to see here. And Andy Burnham has actually been convinced by that. So we'll come on now to a few reasons why that's a hasty decision by Mr. Burnham, and he really shouldn't have been so easily convinced by the bland assurances from the Home Office.
Okay, well, I think part of this is this one. The Scottish Law Reporter came out with a very factual report about a slush fund that was held in the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, which was being used for private legal representation. This is the heart of the matter, isn't it? Because the allegation is that this is the pot of money that Eilish Angelini used in order to pay for court action against Robert Green. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's correct. And that's been confirmed by the Crown Office in writing, that Dame Elise Angelini did in fact get public funds in order to carry out a private civil action against Robert Green. Now, we've seen some invoices for this, so we know it goes to £56,000. We don't know the full extent of it. Now, there is an ongoing Audit Scotland investigation into this practice by the Crown Office. That investigation is now in month 4, and we are awaiting anxiously for some update as to what the conclusions of that investigation have been. But clearly the investigation is quite substantial. We know they've been interviewing people from the Crown Office about this practice, so we'll perhaps find out more in weeks to come. But it's most certainly an ongoing investigation, and it most certainly does involve payments made to Dame Elise Angelini. Now, the Home Office position is she's not being investigated, and that is technically true. She's not being investigated. It's the practices of the Crown Office that are being investigated. But those practices involve Dame Elise Angelini in a very big way, and that alone should give the Home Secretary some pause for thought as to the appropriateness of her appointment.
Right. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that every time there's a difficult and I'm going to say a dirty subject for the government, whether it's the abuse of children or it's deaths in custody, along comes a judge or somebody from the judicial system, and we are to trust these people. You've been pointing out that north of the border, of course, judges not declaring their interests, same equivalent south of the border. So we don't really know anything about these people, but we're supposed to trust them. But the Scottish News here picked up on Eilish Angelini, Lord Advocate condemned as disastrous. And this report is talking about the Lockerbie case.
Yes, I mean, there have been many senior QCs and senior people in the Scottish legal establishment have viewed the time of Dame Elise Angelini's command of the judicial system in Scotland as Lord Advocate as being a huge disaster. Now, this is the role is essentially equivalent to the head of the Crown Prosecution Service in England. So he's in charge of all prosecution in Scotland, and there being no significant private prosecution for criminal action in Scotland. And the role is normally fulfilled by a former advocate who provides a corrective hand on the tiller to any overeager investigation or prosecution that might come from the system. But Dame Elise Angelini is from the system. She's a former prosecutor herself, and that steadying hand seemed to be entirely absent. And hence, we had people from the Lockerbie case, senior QCs in Scotland, coming out and saying that our ancient system of criminal justice is going to hell in a handcart under the guidance of Dame Elise Angelini. So that's what we're getting now, investigating deaths in custody in England.
Okay, well, let's just have a look at matters to do with the press. This is a letter in relation to a complaint that was made to the press about reporting around Eilish Angelini, and the key bit there highlighted in yellow is that she was saying that she's never had any involvement in the Holly Gregg case.
Yes, quite clearly. This is 2010. Now, later on, she made some of the main decisions in the Holly Gregg case, although that as well is being denied by the Crown Office and Procurator's Fiscal Service in Scotland, but is being confirmed by the Justice Department. So take from that what you will. But that was 2012-ish. This is earlier. This is 2010. So in 2010, she's made a complaint to Press Complaints Authority about an article in the Firm magazine, and she said quite clearly she never had any involvement in the Holly Gregg case.
Right. And then we've got some letters here which show a rather different story. So this one here, Brian Adam, member of the Scottish Parliament.
Yes, in 2003, much earlier. This is correspondence to Dame Elise Angelini, who was then Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen. So she was at that point in charge of prosecuting, or not prosecuting, the people accused by Holly Gregg.
Okay, and we've got this one here, which is Brian Adam again.
Yes, and have you got a third one there as well? It's outgoing correspondence from...
We've got this one here from the Procurator Fiscal's office.
Right, so this is outgoing correspondence from the Procurator Fiscal Office 2001 to, I think that's to the solicitor representing Anne Holly at the time, if memory serves. So we see lots of correspondence here. Now, that would suggest that the statement made to the Press Complaints Authority that she had no involvement in the case is factually incorrect, would it not, Brian?
Well, it would certainly appear that way. For people who might not be able to read it on screen, on the correspondence within the red boundary, the Procurator Fiscal's office, Attle House, and it says Procurator Fiscal Eilish Angelini, so her name's absolutely on that document. But yes, as you say, it appears that the government has become a bit confused. One department says she's done something, the other one said no, she hasn't. It's all confusion, which often seems to crop up the moment there's a finger pointed at the establishment.
So what we have here is a person with a history of using government funds to silence opposition and criticism, as she attacked Robert Greene through the legal system. A person using the Press Complaints Authority to crush criticism within the press, but it would appear those statements made to the Press Complaints Authority are in fact factually incorrect. And a person who has been extremely opaque about her entire role in the Holly Gregg case and has been really working quite consistently against public transparency in the failures of the criminal justice system. This is the person that Theresa May has selected to investigate and head up an inquiry investigating deaths in custody in England. Our view, those of us who follow this in Scotland, is she's one of the most singularly unqualified and unsuitable people for that role.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll just introduce this term, which I think is slick it, if that's correct. You were very keen to get this on.
Slick it, Brian, slick it.
Slick it, right.
Slick it, yes.
Take us through that very quickly, please, and then we're going to see whether it applies to Mr. Salmon. I think that's the way it works, isn't it?
Well, I couldn't possibly comment. You might think that. Yes. Last week we had Bletherskite. We were talking about Police Scotland's new boss, and we had Bletherskite, which is basically someone affected by verbal diarrhoea. Today we've got the word for the week in Scots is sleekit, which is basically cunning and oily and weasel-like.
Ah, right, okay. I thought that the main drive there was on a well-kept furry coat, and I must admit there was some confusion because, of course, Alex Salmon is a bit short of his furry coat up top, but it's a bit more weaselly than coat.
Yes, we're talking about glib and smooth and oily.
And oily. Okay, well, let's bring him in because, of course, Mr. Salmon has been talking on LBC Radio, and I believe that he's had quite a few people ringing up with interesting questions. He's promised to tell the truth on everything and to answer every question, but I think he's already been picked up.
He said that no topic is off limits. A very brave statement to make for a politician, I thought.
Right.
But unfortunately, people have been phoning in wanting to discuss the Holly Gregg case and his personal role in it. They've not so far been successful in getting through to air. And indeed, people phoning in wanting to discuss Scottish independence seem to have had similar problems. So, I mean, clearly those editorial decisions have to be made, and maybe we'll get to these in later weeks. But so far, many of the most interesting subjects have not been covered in the radio programme.
Okay, maybe that gives us an opportunity to speak to LBC in due course. I'm sure we'd be very happy to give them a call. David Cameron, always an important man, and he's now been standing up apparently to tell us that we need to be taught how to control our children, and he's calling for a revolution in child rearing. And before I hand back to you, I thought we might just also pop up on screen, of course, the Guardian article that this parent, Mr. David Cameron, and his wife had a couple of drinks in a pub, and as you do, we've left our daughter there. So he's just the man, obviously, to advise the nation on child rearing. I don't really like that term very much. What's this man up to?
Well, I mean, yeah, leaving your children in the pub. In Scotland, the named person would be informed of that. In fact, we might actually find out if pub landlords are part of the information gathering network. Perhaps they are. Yes, David Cameron is now going to be giving advice on child reading. Now, this is getting ever younger. One of the things to watch here is there's a constant, and this comes from the World Bank and it comes from UNESCO, there's a constant drive to get the children younger and younger. In Scotland now we're looking at free nursery education. From 3, David Cameron's now talking about 2 as the point where the state gets involved in raising your children for you. And I've heard one left-wing commentator in Scotland, works with BBC, well established, in shaping information and shaping thought and discourse in the country, advocate 1 as the age that state involvement in child rearing in terms of free full-time nursery care should actually kick in. So if you have a child, don't raise it. The state's going to raise it for you. You go back to work and earn some tax money. And meanwhile, you can trust the state to raise your child the way the state would want it raised, which is very much the agenda for the named person scheme. But it's clearly been rolled out in England in a different form, but the ideas underpinning it are just the same.
Right. Now, you were keen to show us this. It's a national with Angry Salmon, how to have named persons without tears make a robust case to parents. I've just pulled out a bit of text on this. We've got, however, this significant section of the Children and Young People Scotland Act has been kept suspiciously off the public radar and not openly championed as the world-beating miracle cure that its creators doubtlessly consider it to be. I'll concede that every child being assigned a mandatory government official who employs a well-being wheel to determine if the kid is happy or not isn't something parents are used to. And you've got to watch it because down at the bottom it's talking about you can be classified as hostile or non-engaging.
Yes, this character here, this is a started off as a spoof Twitter account called Angry Salmon. And it was claiming to be the thoughts of Alex Salmond while he was feeling less restrained, and it was such a successful Twitter account and character amongst nationalists supporting opinion in Scotland. It got its own column in the national paper, which is Pravda for Scottish People. So this actually illustrates the degree to which the No to Name Person campaign has been successful in forcing this onto the agenda. We had the whole taxi driver spying scandal within the last couple of weeks. The National felt it had to comment on that. We'll come to that in a moment. And here we have one of the sort of nationalist icons, tongue-in-cheek to an extent, but a nationalist icon, having to be wheeled out to try and shore up the named person policy, and really failing quite appallingly. It's interesting that the case that they chose to illustrate how harmful the named person could be was the Simpsons cartoon. They didn't choose a real-life case of a real-life Scottish person being hounded by real-life state functionaries on a power kick. No, they didn't choose any of those stories. And those are out there, and those are out there, well documented, and there's good evidence for this. And some of the people, at any rate, are willing to go on the record. No, we didn't go there. We went to the Simpsons, fairyland, little people in bright yellow, and in a fake world, to illustrate how the named person might be harmful. So very much trying to downplay it. He then said, the named person idea makes people anxious that once again politicians are trying to put out the village fire with a tsunami. For every child saved from mistreatment, many other families could be put under unwarranted scrutiny and made to suffer needlessly at the hands of education and health professionals, who might also be unduly burdened. The most undesirable element is the potential workload it could dump on underpaid teaching and medical staff who didn't choose to be social workers. So a strange and oily and sleek-it attempt to deflect the criticism. All of that is wrong. Just very briefly, we're talking about...
Quickly, David, because I'm going to be a bit ruthless through the clock today.
Okay. It's not a matter of scale. It's a matter of issue. It's a matter of basic fundamental rights and wrongs. It's not getting the scale wrong. It's getting the very idea that the state has a right to intervene in family life wrong. Yeah. And the most onerous thing is not going to be unwarranted scrutiny. It's going to be unwarranted child stealing by the state. It's going to be unwarranted court action against families. It's going to be devastating. It's not going to be The Simpsons.
I couldn't agree with you more on that one. If you dare criticise the system, though, it appears that you're right wing, and the National here has got an MSP gentleman grinning from ear to ear who says, well, of course, if you say this is Stasi-like behaviour, and this is in relation to taxi drivers reporting on any comments said in their cab, then he says you're right wing. What do you know about this guy? Just a short comment, because I'm keen to get into the charities.
They're trying to paint it as a political divide. They're trying to paint it as Tories and Daily Mail readers against the fine people of nationalists who are only there to trying to help every child and give everyone a big hug from the state. It's nonsense. But the interesting thing is he then listed a whole series of charities. Why is this okay? Look who supports us. And he listed a whole series of 11 charities that support the named person scheme. Indeed they do. Thing is, Brian, that list of 11 charities, it seemed vaguely familiar. We seem to have seen that list, those names, before, and indeed we have.
And presumably it's connected with this. So we've got the Scottish Government here boasting that it's given 14.7 million funding, not of government money, of course it's public money. And I've just put this little header in here: child intervention charities receive government funding. Is this the key bit that you're...
Yes, this is 14.7 million, and we looked at the list of charities that support the named person scheme, and would you believe, Brian, every single one of them was receiving sizable government funds from this pot. This is for the current year, so it's 14.7 million a year. The list of charities supporting the government on the named person scheme were receiving a combined well over 2 million per annum in government funding. So that's why they're supporting it. They are paid to.
Right, and of course the moment we go into charities, we're heading into the third sector, and you've pointed us at this Mises Institute of Scotland before, but we've got a little bit of history here, but we're saying people being bought and sold for gold. This is talking about world over governments, the rise of the global style of government have been buying people. To have these people organised into worthy sounding groups called not-for-profit organisations and charities suits the government because it can then buy and manipulate them, presumably. And down here he says all of this is on the principles of filthy lucre. And it brings it nicely to the government's getting it right for every child, which is the Scottish Government version of No Child Left Behind in the USA and Every Child Matters in England. All of the clues here are this is not national policy we're seeing coming in. This is coming from the United Nations.
Yes, and this article lists all the charities that support the named person and lists how much money they received this year from the government. So you see that there's an exact correlation. It's 11 out of 11. But it's also very important to remember that halo effect, that as governments point to the third sector and say, well, look, we must be right because charities, and who would be against charity, they support us. Well, these days the charities are simply an extension of government. They're bought, they're paid for, they're simply are less apparently threatening. People turn off the normal human suspicion when someone says, I'm from a charity. Someone says, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Everyone knows that means grab your wallet and run for your life. People say, I'm from a charity, they don't get the same reaction. That turns off people's natural caution, and charities get further. But they are, in fact, an extension of the state in very many cases.
And a very dangerous one. So named person, no to named person's been continues to do good campaigning work, and you're promoting here talks coming up.
Yes, Greenock is on Monday, and the following 2 weeks after that, Monday the 1st of February, the named person campaign goes to Falkirk. So people in those areas, I hope they can come along and find out lots and sign up to help.
Okay, that's good. And you're also pointing out that, that if I've got this right, this is a new party or organisation in Scotland which is showing interest in what no to named persons is doing. Yes, there's a Scottish Libertarian Party which is recently formed, and apparently I think is going to be fielding candidates at the forthcoming Holyrood election. So they're very new on the scene. And there's also this thing called the Scottish Liberty Forum, which is a monthly meeting with speakers and discussing items to do with personal and economic liberty. This coming Saturday in Glasgow, they're discussing the named person. As you see, they have titled it Named Person and the Death of the Family. So that's in central Glasgow, 3 p.m. on Saturday, tomorrow. Excellent.
So hopefully people in the area will come along to that.
Okay, well, obviously public debate is good because that's the way of getting the truth out. Now, I'm just going to run through, you brought up Police Scotland. I've got a few images here which we'll just sort of scan through, and then we'll come back to you to talk. But we got Daily Record, Police Scotland's new Chief Constable vows to deploy more armed officers if threat increases. And he said it'd be foolish to rule out more armed police following those para-terrorist attacks. And they need change. We need to think about the capabilities for the future. Some of that will be skills. Some of it will be technical kit, guns. Some will be investment. Choices will have to be made. Lots of good political squidgy language. He's been sworn in. He's promising to build a service the public can trust. It's one of the most demanding jobs in British policing. He's immensely proud. He's going to lead the men and women of Police Scotland through the next stage of its journey, which will probably be a journey towards the utopia of transformation over the Rainbow Bridge. And what a pity that it's the same police force that wanted to get Sheikh Ubey's body removed from Scotland, presumably to help the evidence disappear. Now, Andrew Fan here, really excellent article talking about Scottish police sitting on a paedophile dossier. I'll let you come back in here, David.
Yes. Firstly, the introduction. The reason that the Scots Word of the Week last week was blatherskite is in recognition of Mr. Gormley's contribution to banal management speak. Right? I would point out that I didn't think I could have less confidence in Sir Stephen House's successor than I did in Sir Stephen House. But really, choices will have to be made. Well, that alone, that's got to be worth at least £200,000 salary. That little gem of insight there. Join us in our journey. It's just a beginner's guide to banal management tripe, as far as I can tell. He's now off on a 100-day tour of police stations in Scotland. The weather's nice at the moment, so that's good for him. And to talk to the officers, because obviously this is a man that came from the National Crime Agency in London. I don't know if that was a huge success, Brian. Maybe you can fill me in some detail there. He came from the National Crime Agency in London. They came up to Scotland, and I don't know if he's ever been here on holiday before, but he certainly doesn't know anything about Scotland or Scots. So that's now who is running the police service. But there is one thing he could do to show that he's actually got guts and he's actually going to make a difference, and that is release the paedophile dossier that the police in Scotland hold regarding, this one here, regarding Moira Anderson's murder, and an allegation that was made by a convicted paedophile that there was a ring in operation and it involved, amongst others, senior police officers. That should be in the public domain, that should be discussed, that should be open, and that should be investigated. It's not, it's locked in some safe somewhere in Police Scotland headquarters, and it seems to be staying there. So that's where we are with Police Scotland, at least for the moment.
Well, I'm just going to cheat, if I may, David, and jump south of the border, because just before we came live, I picked up on this one that the Express is saying, breaking news, Lord Janner's child sex abuse case has been dropped. So yes, he died, but all of the evidence could have been brought into court and aired publicly so that the public could see exactly what accusations were being made about this man. But no, they've decided that's not the right thing to do. We're going to make sure that evidence never sees the light of day. And on the subject of where the future goes, thank you very much for the person who sent us this in relation to Guernsey. What this is about is the integration of services on the island. So they're beginning to, they are going to integrate the police, customs officers and immigration officers and others so that, they get cost savings. And this is part of the UK National Crime Agency arrangements, as you just sort of mentioned. But basically, we've got one state Stasi being formed. And here it is in Guernsey. We're seeing it in other places as well. Isn't it remarkable that if we look at dirty little secrets on the island, the police officer who was heading up the Haute de la Garenne investigation, Lenny Harper, has been really speaking out. Police sold drugs to prostitutes and put pornography on work computers, but the Attorney General let them off. He said there's a culture emerging in Jersey of systematic child abuse, which was far worse than a single paedophile ring. And children were in effect being loaned out to people and taken on board yachting trips. Now, whether this relates to Edward Heath or not, I don't know, but it would certainly appear to be in the bracket. But there we are, same stuff, same cover-up going on, whether you're in the Channel Islands, whether you're in England, or whether you're north of the border. I know you're keen to get on to...
It would seem that Bill Maloney and Pine Marsh Films were absolutely on the money.
Of course he was on the money, and that is why subsequently he was threatened, and that's why Metropolitan Police officers refused to engage with him to talk about the evidence, and indeed that's why originally, of course, they sidelined witness Chris Fay. Now, all of this is a very serious state of affairs. I know you're very keen to have a little bit of analysis of what is building north and south of the border, and that's a pretty vicious political system. I think we can certainly do 5 minutes on this, maybe a fraction over, David. Take us through what you're actually seeing building in the British political system.
Right, okay. The basic the basic way to look at this is that we have two very clear systems of running a country. One is based on freedom. It's called capitalism, but it's basically based on freedom, private property rights, and having a situation where that each individual decides for him or herself what he does with his talent and time and money and resources. The other system is one of state planning, socialism, where government officials decide what everyone will do, and the government as a whole own all the major assets of the country. Now, freedom tends to work, but it's very messy and untidy, and it's very difficult to get ahead there because you have certain checks and balances. You have things like, if you have freedom of entry into any marketplace, then if you develop a sizable holding in a marketplace, someone else can come and compete with you, Brian. It's very difficult. So we then have lots of interests that push towards the more socialist view. Now, socialism, as originally conceived, always fails and fails very rapidly. So you tend to get people looking for a middle way. Tony Blair was the apostle of the third way. Now, the third way was and always has been some form of a system known as fascism. And fascism is an area that we need to be able to recognise. And very often we're not, because people have a view of this that it somehow involves jackboots and lots of funny marching and necessarily military and necessarily anti-Semitic or xenophobic or what have you. Now, it can involve these issues, but it doesn't absolutely have to. What you've got is a system where you have nominally private ownership of the means of production, but it's in fact state directed. So you have increasing control of the state, by the state, over everything that happens in the country. So you're seeing this in Scotland all over the place. You're seeing it in the name-person scheme. You're seeing it in a new registry of who owns every piece of land, and then the government will decide whether you're using your land appropriately, and if you're not, it will be taken from you. You're seeing it in regulation through Europe, enormous regulation binding the hands of industry. You're seeing it in many, many ways all around the world, and certainly in Europe, certainly in Britain. Now, there are many interesting things to do with fascism that people seem to be blind to. It's important to note that fascism is very pro the welfare state. This is how it's sold. This is how it's always been sold. It's very pro-government intervention in marketplaces. It's very pro-cradle-to-grave type protection of the people. So therefore, the left find it very difficult to argue against it because they're also for these things. But fascism will also pretend at least to be pro-religion, pro-family, pro-traditional values, pro-the nation. So the right tends to be somewhat put to sleep by it, and they won't recognise it for what it is. And hence you get this creeping state control over everything, and less individual liberty, and more government authority over every aspect of our life. And that's where we are. And it's interesting. We'll come to a couple of books which I'm suggesting people have a look at, and they were both written by refugees from fascism, and they were both written in the 1940s. One's called The Road to Serfdom, and it's written by F.A. Hayek. Now, he was an Austrian economist, and he was then working in the London School of Economics. And when he was a German speaker, he had experience of what the descent into fascism in Germany had actually involved, and he spoke from a position of knowledge and experience. Now, his view was that we faced as many threats to liberty from the left wing, the Soviet idea, the socialist ideas, as we did from out-and-out fascism, and the two were very similar. He dedicated the book to socialists of the left and socialists of the right. He was somewhat constrained writing in 1943, when we were allied against Nazi Germany and with the Soviet Union. He was somewhat constrained as what he could actually say about the socialist system, but he covered really pretty well. And some of the book's wonderful. There's one or two chapters that are a bit compromising, but some of the book is absolutely wonderful, and the insights are very, very profound as to how he saw that by fighting fascism, we were actually becoming the thing that we were trying to oppose. The second book is called Omnipotent Government, and it was written by Ludwig von Mises. Now, he's also an Austrian economist, and he was Jewish. Now, he had to get out sharpish from Austria, and he spent 6 years in Switzerland and then went to America, and essentially had to start his life again. I think he was in the late 50s or 60s by this point. He had lost his entire library. He essentially had what he stood up in. And he was in a new country speaking a language which he at that point did not speak. So he certainly had a lot of mountains to overcome. So he wrote and taught until the end of his life. Much later, I think he taught well into the 1970s. The book he's written here, Omnipotent Government, was one of the first ones he wrote after they arrived in America, and that was written in 1944. So again, you could see and had experienced, and he'd lived through the rise of fascism. Now, one of the things he identifies here, and it's quite critical, is it's a critical facet of fascism. And the reason that Jeffrey Tucker was the first man to call out Donald Trump as being a fascist is he recognised the same policy in the Trump view of the world. He said the thing that separated the Nazis from other groups is not the anti-Semitism, although it was there, it's not the militarism, it's not the dictatorial methods, because all of these, there's a whole history of people on this planet falling for that, for being military, being aggressive, and living under dictators. It's hardly new. He said, no, the thing that was new, the thing that was unique, is the whole idea of living space, Lebensraum. That was key to Nazi philosophy. And what it meant was you had to have an economic sphere of influence which you could ring fence, which was big enough that you could actually get all the resources that you needed to run your entire economy with central planning under your control. It is the very opposite of the classical liberal free trade, where you trade with other countries to get the things that you don't have. Now, the free trade is important because when goods don't cross borders, armies do. But he's pointing out this living space, Lebensraum, and essentially this is what Donald Trump is currently calling for, and this is what the European Union is currently calling for. And we're looking here at what's happening to this country. We have a choice to make. Do we remain a trading, outward-looking, free market country who will trade across the seas with the whole world? Or do we become part of Europe's living space? That's the choice we have to make. Down one route, there is hard work but freedom, and down the other route, there's cradle-to-grave protection from the state and no liberty.
David, thank you very much for that excellent analysis. We're going to end by just showing this. This is the EU Chronicle. This is a German viewpoint warning that something very, very dangerous is going on in Germany. Reichstag burning in Cologne. And what this article is saying is that when Germans are looking into what's happening with the violence amongst immigrants, and in particular the rapes and the sexual abuse that's gone on around Cologne, what they've started to see is political interference by very devious German government organisations. So this bit here, the images of chaotic scenes of that night went round the world and reminded many observers of the hooligan standoff almost 2 years ago that left the police in Cologne also looking unprofessional. Later, after the death by natural causes of the leader of the hooligans, scene, it transpired that he had been a secret agent for the German Office for Protecting the Constitution. So this is Germans warning that they are seeing a hidden hand operating in Germany using the immigration to stir up violence, which can then be used to bring in dramatic state clampdowns. And of course, they are taking people's memories back to the Reichstag fire, which was used for exactly the same purpose. David, on that very serious note, we're going to end. Thank you very much for joining us. That is it for the UK Column News for today. I'll just say thank you very much to the gentleman who drove a very long way to deliver us a very important piece of technical equipment to help us improve what we do. So thank you very much for coming down. We enjoyed meeting you, and it will be put to very good use. We will be back 1 o'clock on Monday, and have a good weekend. Talk to people. Don't get into a black hole. Action conquers fear. We'll see you Monday. Bye-bye.